Are people, Stacy, are you there? Can you hear us? Are people?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute myself.
Oh, okay, good. Because
I can hear you, yeah.
okay, great to see you. It's just a few people are freezing, and I'm not sure if it's something to do with our connection. This is always so relaxing.
It's like a nice yoga
frozen.
practice.
Yeah. Diana, wow.
We should have everyone keep wiggling so we see if they're frozen.
Yeah. We have some people here. Hi everyone on Instagram.
Oh,
This is like high tech. For low tech.
for no tech.
Yeah,
people.
for low tech people.
Technotards.
That's politically incorrect, I think.
Was that political?
I don't know, I would think so.
Oh.
Luckily not everyone was on yet. So we'll give it just a minute more before we start. It's wonderful. This is great. New people, lots of new people. Diana, maybe, are you in China? Yeah. Wow.
You've got a lot of time zones.
Yeah. We seem to be living in multiple time zones ourselves.
So are you enlightened if you don't have a time zone?
I don't know. Are you on? Anyway. I think so. Good. Shall we start?
Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm too.
Well, a few more people are coming in, and so we will take just a moment before we truly begin, but we are wanting to thank you all for joining us tonight it's our nighttime. We have no idea what time zone we're in. We have been traveling kind of non-stop for the last 2.5 weeks and leave again tomorrow morning for a different time zone, so who knows. But it's great to just see people from all over checking in with us. So I see a few more people coming, so let's give it just a minute more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, thank you for joining us. And the topic that we chose, we were kind of saying, why do we pick these difficult topics? We pick them in moments when we are sort of probably after a cup of coffee in the morning, and then by this time we're like, why did we pick this topic? But it's one actually that we picked because it is very relevant, we think, to what's happening in the world these days, and what's happening in the world all the time. But in this particular time frame, there is kind of a heightened awareness for some of us of things that we end up not being able to take care of, the things we leave undone because there's so much to do, so much chaos, so much confusion, and there's a feeling sometimes that time is just spinning away and leaving us in the dust. And so we started contemplating, like, how do you deal with complex times and trying to work with in your own realm of survival and of service. Yeah, and make a difference, make some changes that if that's possible. And so the topic of things left undone and the wheel of time came to mind. And so we thought we'd break it down a little bit. Like, for instance, what on earth are we talking about when we say the wheel of time? And those of you who have studied yoga or Buddhism probably have an idea about the Kala Chakra, which is the wheel of time. Literally.
Yeah.
And it's a practice and a study that is a very traditional practice where you have all kinds of sort of rituals and chanting and texts and teachings that you follow for many, many years. And it's sort of like you're walking around in your own awareness, a constructed building, in a sense, that represents pretty much everything.
Everything, and you go through practice stages where you start to see, oh, that right there is wonderful, and it is what we're all looking for.
Yeah.
And then, but you don't see that everywhere, and so you go through another initiation, and
So there,
the
and
wheel
there's,
keeps turning.
yeah, and it's somewhat a parallel to Dante's Inferno, the rings of hell that we have to go through, or the rings of awakening awareness. And then in all of these, in this one in particular, in the Kala Chakra, the ultimate is that, when you complete the journey, you find yourself in the clear light, in a place of deep wisdom and clarity, and that it's almost like, when you're in a plane and you come up out of a bumpy takeoff, and then suddenly you're in the clear above the clouds, and there's this sense of spaciousness and vastness and an opportunity to drop in more deeply. And so the wheel of time and the Shuddhashan chakra also represents that in Indian iconography. The chakra of that you can toss and sort of terminate, like toss it across the...
Yeah, you'll see Vishnu, Shiva, and even Patanjali sits there with the wheel of time, the Kala chakra, the Sudarshan chakra, the wheel of beautiful vision, of true vision, and it's the ultimate weapon, and you just go, and it returns to your finger, because you are in a position where it's not a problem for you, but you can usually, in most of the myths, they decapitate, or they take off the head of the enemy. But the head, of course, represents the complexity, the confluence of thought and time, of language masses. And so you go, and you go, ah. And I'm sure that if you were to get in trouble enough with one of those characters, it would be a quick way to... And in fact, many of our moments of stunning samadhi, you could find a parallel. Oh, I was just so odd, and I finally observed my own mind, and then my higher being sliced off my head into...
And so the real sort of culmination of the wheel of time is death. That's what strikes us, and that, it is this process of impermanence, whether it's the death of our own embodied form or the death of something that we are involved in. And And so the question then is, is everything stuck on this wheel of time? And when you speak sometimes, Richard, in classes, you say something like, well, if you do Mulabandha, or if you do Chittabandha properly, then time stops. And so what is that? And then also, what do you mean by that? And then also, in so many texts and chants, there is this idea of Amrita, which is the idea that Mrita means death, right?
Yeah.
And Amrita would therefore mean no death. And so the question then is, is that what those chants and texts are talking about, is no death? Because very often it's translated as nectar. And if it's not no death, why is it nectar if time then results in death, etc.? So,
yeah, it's a delicious nectar.
Yeah.
And it's a nectar that they say drips from the moon right back here in the upper frontal sinuses and above. You get different quantities of nectar. And what the nectar is intelligence or insight, discriminating awareness, prajna, and then compassion or empathy. Compassion is like seeing others, and then seeing others truly in your heart if you drink it. And then humor is the third quality. And humor, besides being, the ability to make jokes about that which is that really funny? It has to do with appreciating and not being confounded by self-reference paradox that always comes from any thought or any language, any coding. You get confused between the code or the name and then what the thing actually is.
Yeah.
And
so
that's the humor.
Yeah, and so relating that to the wheel of time, or time itself, why would Amrita, or interface in an intelligent way with time, so that, because you're saying when you do these practices correctly, time stops. and so what do you really mean by that, and how does that relate to the bigger picture of Amrita and impermanence and our perception of that?
Mm-hmm. So the Amrita...
Turning it over to you tonight.
Yeah, that's an easy question. And so if we're feeling like, what we often have, and it gets longer and longer, is you just have a moment where it's like the lights go on, and the metaphorically, I guess, the clear light goes on, or the central path opens in a way that it's this stunning release, but then quickly, due to habit, due to what I think we call unfinished business or something like it, the mind is a very stubborn thing, and all of a sudden we just go, wow, what was that? And we've often thought, let me get my phone, I want to do a photo of that, and then we have a memory of that joyous moment where and sometimes we get that memory of it confused with the action, and so we are unable to find that experience again.
But it is.
You think, oh, it's golden and it has purple, and that's the way it's supposed to. And then we start looking for that rather than looking at what is actually in our face. And yet the moment of awe comes when you finally look at what is actually right in front of you, so to speak, what they call, what in front of, pratyaksha, or right in front of your eyes, or your ears, or your nose, or your skin, or what's actually happening.
And that experience is really one, isn't it, of a moment of clarity, like this, what is referred to in the Kala Chakra as this, clear light, this clear vision, this clear perception. And that's, that does have this feeling a little bit of time stopping. You're not, I'm someone who, as you well know, is like always saying, what time is it? And and there are times that, that I'm not concerned with that, often during practice or in the state of absorption in something really profound, or in something actually just that really captures the imagination and the aesthetic, etc. And so, in a sense, one of the things that happens with the Wheel of Time, which I think is fascinating, is that it has this cyclical quality to it, where things happen, and we think this is what is happening, and that this is what is going to be happening forever.
Like sunrise, sunset,
or I'm thinking when I have had a surgery, like I had a surgery on my knee, and the knee was painful, and the recovery was difficult, and I was thinking this is going to be it for the rest of my life. And then, because it's what is present and in your face, like you're saying, and then suddenly you realize you've been on this sort of whirligig thing going around, and even if the experience itself is similar in your own physical body, you've got a new perspective because it's rotated in time and space. And that, to me, is also fascinating in that it is like when you read some of the classical texts, like the oldest Upanishad, and the Yoga Vasishtha, we were talking about that. There are these texts that have these very deep messages, but they often, you'll read an Upanishad and you'll read one statement, and then it seems like it's just saying it over and over in a slightly different way.
In a circular way.
Or the Satipatthana Sutta is a little bit like that, and it's like, well, yeah, let me just get to the end, let me get to the juice of this, and what is it in these texts, when we look at them, that is the seed of sort of intelligence that's being taught, and then how is it being shown to us from various different perspectives, I think is an interesting way to read some of those stories and those texts.
Yeah, one practice is to behold, that's a religious word, to see the wheel of time. And and it's of course everywhere. Everything is part of it. And I can't help but think of, you go outside and just start looking at the nature, and you'll, just from the little moment by moment changes throughout the evening or the night or the sunrise, or to then the seasons, to what the plants are doing, to then what the planets are doing, and the different stars and galaxies. They're all interfacing in this continuous movement where not a single thing actually remains forever, but you have this relative change, and so there's some things, seem to last too long.
Indeed.
and other things are so fast. But it's being awestruck with just any way of perceiving it. And so you're perceiving, and that perception is nectar.
Yeah.
Is,
And that perception
and
then,
it's almost a timeless thing. It's a timeless awareness of we often think of time or samsara as tragic, but it's also, is it? I mean, does it have to be? It's tragic in many situations. But could it be also delightful and amazing and creative, perhaps?
and you know, which really, when you look at that wheel of time, or the way these texts talk about it, or the way we experience things, as the cyclical pattern, rather than, you know, sort of the chakra that's going to cut our heads off at one point, the right moment of death. When you look at it in that way, and then juxtapose that with the idea of unfinished business, or like, what are we talking about when we say unfinished business? And that's, so we wanted to pull apart, like, this is what the wheel of time is a little bit. It's thought of in many different ways, but really, if we look at it as just this wave, it's not even a wave necessarily, it's just this cyclical pattern of...
and sometimes it's represented just as a circle, and then people say, well, it never comes back around
to the exact...
In other words, you don't go back in time to, say, whatever moment you choose, you know, like when I was born, or another holiday or something. But it's actually, because everything is changing, and it doesn't...
it's impossible.
It would be messy to try to turn, you know, biology backwards, and the seasons, it would be really messy. But, so it's more like a spiral, rather than a circle.
Yeah, or even like...
But then the people will say, okay, it's a spiral that goes on for zillions of infinity, but eventually it loops back around to its beginning.
Yeah.
And you could say, and this is all our mind, and the human mind and the inhuman mind. Well, you say, well, that it returns to sort, but maybe that's forming another spiral, and so it's quite the topic for
and in that context, there is this sense of continuity, so that it is unending, that in spite of the fact that perhaps it is true that it, not perhaps, it is true that the ultimate wheel of time action is death, is the end of things. And yet, there is this continuity from the very beginning to the end of one's life, and then beyond. Because it is within our own experience, yes, our own corporeal experience of this world will come to an end. We will leave this body, and who knows what exactly happens. Many people have experienced, certain consistent patterns, and many, great sages have experienced what death is and written about it. But with all of them, there is this continuity, not only within one's own experience of being, but beyond, into the experience of others, into the experience of interpenetrating patterns in nature and in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so that image of something, where we have a flat disc that's just circling around and around, doesn't capture it, and the idea of a spiral that goes off leads our mind to believe it's going somewhere other than here. But in fact, it's going here. That's where it always leads, and yet here is never the same moment. So as soon as we've said here, it's gone, that'll never come
But
back.
it's all, and
But
here's
then
where it gets fun. It's always now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, so it's,
now, when I talked about, yeah, is it the same now as it was 10 minutes ago, or 10 seconds ago, or a tenth of a second ago, or 100,000 years ago, or billions of years ago?
Yeah.
Is it the same
Which-
now?
and that's really
And
what,
it ain't different, but is it? But the content and the sense of release
Mhm.
is, you can't say, it's like, is it the same clear light that you experience, or is that just our language function, our brilliance, of our creative brilliance of the divine ego, just trying to make a story out of it so that life can go on? Because certainly, in the wheel of, if the wheel of time is death, wouldn't it then be birth?
yeah.
But just in terms of biologically, so.
And speaking of the wheel of time, at this point in history, part of why we thought it was relevant is that, when you look at things in the world that are, in our view, very, very confused, very troubled, very complicated, and with a lot of problems and a lot of suffering being caused to many people by others, a few others, and yet you look at history, and this is not the only time in history that the world as we know it has been in chaos. And so what is it that as yoga practitioners we can do to find, to number one, have some sense of, oh yeah, this is part of a bigger pattern, which then does not mean that we say, oh, don't worry about it, it'll pass, which it probably will pass. But as yoga practitioners to say, well, what is it that we can do, or what impact can we have in order to bring a sense of clarity, that point that is at the center of the Kala chakra, that is at the center of the wheel of time, to bring more of that clarity into our own lives, but also potentially sort of make a pathway that others might be able to find their own little pods of clarity, so that there's more clarity within chaos. And that starts to be, something that is that we realize as we've practiced yoga, that we can manage to do something in order to make a difference. And that brings us to unfinished business, I think. Or what were you wanting to say?
Oh, I was just going to say breath.
Yeah. That's
And by breath, of course, I don't mean breath, but I do mean breath in the sense of sensation, or prana, or what is actually arising in the present moment, to be able to observe it without pushing or pulling on it, just to really look almost with curiosity or awe at these different, and then in doing that, what we call the prana, or of the heart, is all of a sudden you see, oh, this is what really turns me on and turns me off. Has to do with my sense of my sense of self. Even though I'm selfless, I have a sense of self, and so whether I'm hating myself or just loving myself. But in that same process of the practice, you start to see others.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so they say like the yoga is to see. So Ishvara means the beloved. It doesn't necessarily mean the supreme deity, because you can have in Buddhism, Ishvara is the and you see that beloved, which is this indescribable, we're not allowed to do, just in other beings.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what a nice thing, and that also, it makes your own current, even physical situation, seeing, well, I'll do my best to make my body work, but I can sense an inevitable impermanence there. But there's still a joy in seeing.
And it gives you, the direction to look in order to take action, which, as we've talked about in other talks, the idea of living a life with a sense of compassion is one in which we feel empathy, we feel connected to others, we feel the sense, as you're saying, the pranic patterns of this movement of time, and the fact that that's pervasive, all pervasive. And as we feel that, we then have the sense of getting grounded enough that we can, kind of look at the big situation and discern what can we do. And this starts to be a motivation for taking action. And the action starts to be where business or unfinished business come out of. Because the confusion that happens is we're seeing this wheel of time, and we start thinking, well, I can control things. I can, rather than I can make a difference, I can make things work the way I see them needing to work. And that is kind of a human tendency to do, which is not a bad thing, because you've got to have
that ability. At least with your computer.
Yeah, at least with your Instagram Live that died on us, but it had the wheel of time very short tonight.
Yeah, that was on purpose. Right?
Yeah, well, from what we hear, Instagram is like a 6-second thing anyway, so it's probably long. But anyway, we digress. But we juxtaposed unfinished business with the wheel of time because we talk very often about residue and residue within the practice, which in a sense is a form of something that is unfinished. But it is not business in the sense that you have, the way we talk about residue from a practice is something that occurs because it is being unnamed, it is being uncategorizable, it is the leftovers. Whereas when you are acting decisively, you have an aim, you have a goal, you have a belief system that you're following, and so it helps you to move through the world, and you can either be quite conscious about that or quite unconscious about that. Like the dishes build up in the sink, and an unfinished business end of it would be that you just never get to them as an unconscious end.
But part of you would really love to go watch. Well, part of me, would really love to go watch
really?
the dishes. It's a new thing.
It's a new thing.
But I, had to do something that was more important. And so that in one sense is a residue, it's a leftover, but it's not residue but there are many different layers. And one is, just in terms of your practical life, if you have to run and do something, particularly in emergency or difficult situations, there's always residue. I never did this with I never paid my credit card, or I forgot to do this, or
Lock the door.
lock it. And so that's one type of residue. But that type of residue is like a package that isn't really considered shesha, which is literally the word for residue. Ananta shesha, the residue of infinity, is all of the packaging around sensation and form, or big and small. That packaging itself, and all the packaging is conceptual. It's constructed of mind. It's when that packaging finally drops off, and then it filters down as shesha, or just this delightful flow back to the Muladhara chakra. So we were doing residue that needs then to be further processed.
Yeah.
And this is part of the traditional
Yeah.
teachings in many lineages.
And in asana practice or meditation practice or chanting even, and when we look at, the residue and think of it in terms of the embodied experience, we often talk about the idea that it is when you finish, say, a really intense asana practice and you are lying there in shavasana at the end, and there's this feeling of sort of vibration in the body, the prana moving through the body, and that is the feeling of residue from all of the movements, the thoughts, the breathing patterns, the tightness and all of that have come through the practice. And by sitting with them until that pranic pattern that you were talking about of sort of processing it, until that settles into a state of equanimity, that is how the residue becomes absorbed, and the learning, the intelligence, the wisdom that comes from the residue or the unfinished part of things, that's how it becomes this transformative aspect of things.
Yeah, to be able to stay with residue, or to stay with just mindfully, meaning to follow it, to observe it without running off into conclusions or theories about it. That is one way of processing residue. And that's wonderful. And then what usually happens is you go boom, way off, and then you have to do what they call dharana, dhyana, samadhi. You have to go back and find that which allows you to focus your mind, which could be then you return to the use of a prayer or a mantra, or you find that which allows you to focus. So it's almost like a religious thing, and so you come back to the religious mind, and it's either positioning yourself inside of a temple or a church, a mosque, so that, now I can relax and meditate on my breath. And we all have, cultural inclinations, and then we all have our unique personal religions that, it's just whatever turns you on, as we say in the 60s. And,
we'll translate it for you later. It's just whatever you find.
But then, through it, you're able to, all of a sudden, you're able to relax enough to feel faith or trust, shraddha, so that you can go and just get absorbed in the amazing beauty of the turning of the wheel.
Yeah.
So you go, and then your breath tends to be suspended, and when the breath, you don't know whether you're breathing in or breathing out, when the breath stopped, and
that's really what you're saying.
Cares.
When time stops, that's the experience of time stopping.
Yeah.
And the confusion, I think, that happens is this this idea that we have to take action to sort of interface with the wheel of time, which we do have to take
At
action.
that level, yeah, we have
But-
to.
But at the same time, to really be clear, as we are in an asana practice, let's say, at least we have some clarity of why we are doing this. You know, maybe it's just because we want to do our practice, but perhaps there's more to it than that. But why we are taking particular actions that then wind up perhaps having some unfinished aspects to them. For instance, you know, doing some work and not being able to complete the work. And so every action that we take, whether it's in the asana practice or whether it's, you know, off the mat into the world, is driven, as you're saying, by our cultural perspectives, our interests, our likes, our dislikes. And there comes a point where if we are not cycling back, maybe through this awareness of a cyclical pattern of existence, if we're not cycling back to the fact that our actions are part of this bigger picture, then that's when we get off kilter. That's when, for instance, in the world that we're involved in these days, there are these people who are so detached, politicians and business people, etc., who are so detached from the fact that this is one big, you know, interfacing wheel of experience. And we can all, in our small ways, do this, where it's like, well, this is what has to happen. And we've lost sight of not only others, but we've lost sight of what we really are intending to do and why we have started to do it. So that when we take actions, it's really important to be clear on what our what we might say, what our agenda is, or in a more sort of a nicer way, what our intention is. As yogis, this is where the yamas and niyamas come in and help us to say, well, what is my, you know, what is my agenda, say, in doing this, that, or the other? And you think, oh yeah, well, I don't want to harm people. I do want to, you know, help reduce suffering, if at all possible.
And sometimes, you know, you'll have, I'm going to do this for everybody, and I really, because I got to do something, and it turns out that it isn't a good idea. I'm thinking of. But if you're sincere, and if you're doing it to actually help, then you're watching closely feedback, and you're able to correct, make minor corrections, and upgrade your diagnoses of what's happening in the world, and so that you can be effective. And if it's just done out of some kind of, you know, desire for fame and fortune, you're not really watching the effect on even yourself or others. And so.
Yeah, and when we were thinking of this topic earlier, I was thinking of, you know, in my very esoteric sort of way, it's thinking of unfinished business and the wheel of time. It's almost like patting your stomach and rubbing your head, or rubbing your stomach and patting your head. Because what happens with the unfinished business part is that you start, you know, there's this moment of sort of losing your equanimity, losing your footing, realizing that things are not complete, and the feeling of being swept, as you were saying, off into this spiral of the wheel of time, and like, oh dear, I'm never going to be able to get back here. And then chaos within your own self starts to take over. Or you completely detach from others and the wheel of time, which includes everything. And in that case, you also spin off. And so as practitioners, it seems that when we recognize that, there is something we consider to be unfinished, that we pause with it and we look at it and we look deeply and closely, and it doesn't have to take more than a few breaths to do that, but that we put it in perspective of this bigger, sort of spiraling pattern around sort of the clarity of truth that is at the core of all actions, of all the things that we are doing and all the things that we are thinking are these essential bits of this is truth, this is what impermanence is, this is what interconnectedness is, and this is what it means to be a human being and to be a contributing part of it. Those truths are sort of the center part upon which the wheel can move through space elegantly with us doing either flailing around or being effective, or both, which is highly likely.
Yeah. Sukha.
Mm-hmm.
So, sukha, just happiness or joy, just means that the hole in the wheel is at the center, so it spins well. And dukkha means a bad hole. And someone made the wheel when they didn't put the axle in the center, so it's kind of a lumpy ride.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking again, back to breathing, that we have inhaling and exhaling, which I don't know if you've ever noticed.
That pattern.
It's kind of like, oh, okay. And that's, everything is there. But an extension of that is what they call Vyanavayu, or Vyana is the feeling initially felt through your skin. And so, if you pour cold water over someone's head, or better, pour nectar on top of their head, or
Amrita.
or their hair stands up. It's called horripulation. Your hair can stand up, and the skin is like it's like the external brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you become sensitive to that sensation, then you're able to stay with sensation either through sound, or touch, or sight, or smell, or taste, or even the functioning of the mind eventually. But in it, every point on the skin contains all the other points. When you really look at what they call the jeweled net, or you have wheels inside of wheels, and every point that you choose to focus on is this mysterious, you start to see the mystery of the wheel of time. And some of those wheels are, and they don't all belong just to your imagination. Some are very practical levels of existence, and some are abstract levels. But it makes everything intermesh in a beautiful, living way. So it's amazing that all of this stuff is working, And thank God, there's not an earthquake at the moment, but the floor is solid, and the laws of physics are currently working to keep us online.
Yeah, and it's like the agility that we can cultivate through these practices, the agility of being able to be, sort of really aware of sensation patterns in the body, and really aware of what it means to be sort of coated with residue from the world, but also from our own endeavors, and to recognize that, you know, what we might call residue comes to us from things we do ourselves, and it comes to us from things that we encounter in the world, things that others may do that impact us, and being able to maintain a kind of practice, whatever it is that works for you, for me, for anyone, which may be very, very different for any one of us, being able to maintain a practice that allows us to feel steady and stable, to develop a practice and maintain a practice that allows us to feel a sense of clarity from time to time. We can't always feel clarity, and from that space of steadiness and stability, and at least sort of clarity circling in and around us, we can then start to look at the kind of residue, look at the kind of unfinished business that we run into, and recognize how to interface with it, and if it's something toxic or something coming at us externally, how to respond to that, how to behave in a way that can not do harm, etc. How, if it is unfinished business that is the kind that, you know, we just have gotten off track and have like run out of time, let's say, then there are other things that one might do. But if it's the kind of unfinished business or residue that has intelligence kind of embedded in it, which is really truly any kind of sort of residue that we experience, that is the residue of seeing another person, say, who we just deeply connect with. Maybe even just someone who's, you know, on the street, who we happen to just lock eyes with for a moment, and there's this sense of, yeah, we're in this together, and then you walk past, and there is a residual feeling in the body that, this is what makes us grounded, so that the wheel of time, which is inevitable, isn't, you know, spinning off in space, but it is this powerful and good aspect of being alive. And I'm thinking right now of when we were in Taiwan a year and a half ago, and we were walking every morning. We were a little bit late walking to class, about a 15-minute walk, and there was this woman who was a garbage collector, who was in a truck on the side of the street, and she was, as we came walking by, it was very early in the morning, and she was collecting garbage, residue, and it's a job that a lot of people would think, well, that's not that great a job, you know, don't even notice this person. And as I came upon her truck, I started seeing, wow, you know, she had things so neatly organized, and she had these little deities hanging beautifully clean in the front of her truck, and she was moving smoothly and with quite a lot of ease, you know, getting things organized and taking care of other people's residue, but also tidying it up in just an elegant way. And I remember walking by that morning, and by chance, and I feel it was really with a lot of luck to it, as I was looking at her, she looked right at me, and we shared this look of like me looking at her thinking, and sort of smiling and looking at her and saying, thank you for doing this, and her looking back at me saying, thank you for noticing. And it wasn't like a big deal, except for the fact that when I get off kilter from things I've left undone, that I think, oh, this should have been done, or I wish I had done this, or someone told me to do this, or I have 400 emails I haven't done, and I'm, etc. And I start to kind of flip off of the sense of being steady and stable. I have memories like that one, and that's one of them, that I use as these sort of anchors to bring me back into a space within my own body of like appreciation of the fact that we are really all in this together.
Yeah.
And that without that, I, like everyone else, can go off in a direction that is perhaps not as beneficial as I would want it to be. And then when I become distressed with people who I've seen going off in doing things that seem to me to be, consciously mean or cruel to other people, then being able to foster the like you're saying, the pranic pattern in my own body of generosity and kindness and stability and equanimity and all of those qualities that keep one grounded, then I can interface with the situations that feel toxic in a way that might at least provide stability, that do at least provide stability, and might at best, have a little bit of impact to shift things in a way that is more kind of wholesome and beneficial to others. And so I wanted to just share with you what I have thought about in terms of residual feelings that I've had about life and about things I've left undone or things other people have left on my shoulders, is that when I notice that I'm feeling this sort of prickly feeling, and to me that's what it is, it's, when you're taking the residue from a yoga practice, it's this, glorious, wonderful feeling where the clear light comes and but when it's the other kind of residue, it's kind of prickly for me, and the breath isn't as smooth, the breath isn't as easy, and so the first thing I notice is those physical sensations, which are unique to me. So for anyone else, I'm sure they would be different feelings, but you can...
But often they're feelings that have to do with whatever your health difficulties are, or how they're evolving. Like either that person gives me a headache or...
So prickly. Now I'm like, what are you thinking my health problems are? I'm going to have measles.
We'll have
to research that one. But anyway, so to first do that, and then I ask myself a couple of questions. And the question I have, over unfinished business is, what is it that is my agenda? What is my intention behind thinking of this as something that I would like to share or do or impact, etc.? What is my intention? And being brutally honest with oneself on that front. Not trying to make a story, but really, truly, like you're saying, the dharana and the dhyana, really looking deeply at what is it? Am I projecting beliefs? Am I open to feedback, like you're saying? Am I open to other ideas and to evolving? And then am I listening deeply? Am I really looking deeply? And if I can't answer those in a way that, no, I'm not looking deeply, or I'm not willing to listen, then I know, well, that's part of the prickliness, is that I'm part of the problem. And sometimes, you know, if I answer all those things, then and I'm still feeling this sense of inability to breathe evenly, then that's the time when these years of practice, like most of you who are watching this have had, that's the time when the practice really gives the roots, the foundation, to say, okay, I will just wait, I will pause, I will keep track of what it is I'm feeling, thinking, experiencing, keeping track of the feelings, thoughts, and sensations. And then within no time, usually there's the feeling of stability that resurfaces.
Yeah.
And from that point, the feeling of stability is where the wheel of time has stopped kind of, you know, spinning in off-kilter way, but it starts to be the smooth pattern that keeps things going.
So, it's really in our own deep mind. We have all of the things, you know, that are part of our, just the way the mind works. All of the things that really bother us or really offend us in the world or are there inside of us too. And it's not that they control it or they can control us, but we have to, and when we see that, you know, that it's just part of the nature of mind to have. I don't want to come up with any examples, but you can imagine. And that way you can feel the emotion and the emotion of, you know, towards that, you know, the emotion of, you know, they can be negative like anger and, you know, greed or something, or then you know, wonderful emotions also. But they're all there, and they are all worthy of mindfulness, of being breathed into, of observing, and then you're able to function. So, yeah, the mind is a pretty amazing place.
And, you know, the true thing with all of this is to really practice being kind to yourself through these tumultuous experiences that we all have, whether it's, you know, culturally, politically, etc., or just our own, you know, crazy minds doing what they're doing. And to really realize these patterns of getting thrown off kilter, these patterns of feeling a sense of non-joy in the face of residue, that's perfectly normal. And that's, you know, what happens is if we don't really look deeply at them and be generous with ourselves about having residue, we don't process it. And we don't, you know, it's not all going to lead us to the clear light, but it will just kind of become, you know, stuck in our fascia, in our toes, in our Vyana Vayu in ways that is not really necessarily that healthy. And so it's really important, and I've learned this over the years, to, you know, to stabilize in the process, and then to, you know, be kind to yourself. And we thought we could end tonight with a very, very simple metta practice. And the last line of this, I'm getting ready to go to this wonderful program I'm part of this faculty for every year at the Upaya Zen Center called Being with Dying. And my teacher there, Joan Halifax, has this last sentence that she has said for years and years to caregivers. And I think of it very often as we are our own caregivers. And this is something that we can offer to ourselves to really find, how to deal with residual patterns as time passes on this wheel. So I'll offer it, and then we will, I don't know if you want to chant or not, but no. Okay. So find just a comfortable seat. It's only going to take a minute. And really let the breath be deep in the body. Soft jaw, and the jaw released as the tongue softens and the palate releases. The eyes can be opened or closed. And then I will say these metta or loving kindness phrases, and if you wish to repeat them after me, please feel free to do so, or if not, just listen. There'll be time. May I find stability and steadiness. May I find stability and steadiness. May I listen deeply. May I listen deeply. May I see clearly. May I see clearly. May I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. May I forgive myself for mistakes
Honey, you're
made
so annoying. I'm
and
doing
things
something here.
left
Come on.
undone. So the four senses, may I find stability, may I be stable and steady, may I listen deeply, may I see clearly, and may I forgive myself for mistakes made and things left undone. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if our mistakes made tonight were that our technology got to us again, but I'll try to forgive myself. But if anyone wants to stick around, we'll stay around for about 15 minutes. We have got to get up early to go on I do to go on a flight. So, but if anyone would like to add anything or ask anything, please, we'd love to. Just unmute yourself.
I apologize. I think my mic was on.
That's okay. Forgive yourself for mistakes made. No problem, Kevin.
I was being prodded. And I didn't know the mic was on. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Great to see you guys. Fantastic.
Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will mute again.
Oh, that was like comic relief for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, except you.
Timing is everything.
I can make a comment.
Yeah. Okay.
I've heard you in Mysore or practicing the workshops.
Uh-huh.
You've many times said of, absorbing the residue as part of Shavasana,
Uh-huh.
which is great. But something that's entered into my practice, really, is incorporating that as I go along in the practice.
Yeah.
Means I go slower, but even after, not each pose, but after 2 or 3 poses, it just seems like it's appropriate to take a pause and, like you say, absorb the residue.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that to be very beneficial.
Wonderful. Bob, that's great. And absorbing the residue is up for you. So really go for it. And we hope, that by the time we're working with you in 10 years, it'll take about 6 hours to get through a practice. Thank you.
Can only hope.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Another residue collector. I like that. I'm gonna keep that with me. The residue collector. The woman who was collecting the residue. We could be residue collectors.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harmon. Great. What else? Anyone have a question or?
They're speechless.
They're speechless. That's okay.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello, Mary. Hello, Richard.
How are you?
Alex. Just
Yes.
turn on the camera.
Hey, Alex.
Good. How are you?
Good.
I have a question. So, I recently met my wife's grandfather, and he had dementia. And it was actually a really heavy experience because I never met anybody with dementia before, and it made me wonder. So before, I based my life view kind of like on Taittiriya Upanishad, which when Annamaya Kosha dies, your prana, Vijnana, and Manomaya Kosha continues to live on.
Yeah.
But then seeing a person with dementia made me wonder, is there a hole in the theory? Is there some sort of karma? Or how is like dementia mixed to this?
Yeah.
I might add that her grandfather had big fear of dying,
Mm-hmm.
though that might affect something. I don't know, but it was, yeah. What do you think from this? Thank you.
Yeah, I have one thought which comes from this course that I do on being with dying, and that is that some Tibetan teachers and other sort of Buddhist teachers who, because it's at a Buddhist center, believe also that we have this organizational pattern of different mind qualities of mind that we have learned about in the teachings, and that beneath it also there is almost this sort of the pure mind that is shared mind with all beings, that is almost like shared heart or shared breath. That is this element that out of which these other aspects of mind come for the individual. And so some believe that, in terms of dementia, and there is one person I talked to who was a teacher who was teaching this, that the that the personal version of it that turns in of the mind that turns into a dementia mind is different from the one that is the pure mind or the big mind that holds all aspects of mind and therefore can be part of this process of the death process of moving on, rather than the mind not being clearly capable as it was at one point. Are you getting that? Your face doesn't look like that's making sense.
No, it kind of doesn't.
So that it's almost like it's individual, there are individual manifestations of mind, and beneath it is almost like a shared mind, the quality of mind that is human mind, that we each also tap into. And then we have our own manifestations of mind. And that, when this body dies, it's this body that's dying, and we merge back into kind of pure heart, pure mind, pure being, which is not the individual, Mary Taylor. It's much bigger. So I don't know if that makes
would
sense.
Would it be in Buddhist term of worldview? Like, say we put it in a Sankhya term of view. You're talking about the Purusha itself, the purpose, finish of desire. And that would be under above the dementia mind. And so when the person with dementia died, will return to Purusha. Is that what you're saying in terms of Sankhya?
Essentially, that's, I think, what they were saying, yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
And so there are a number of yoga people who have gotten dementia. Some teachers who are fairly well known
and very well practiced.
and very well practiced. Yet still, in their very old age, they became demented, and I'm just thinking that an interesting thing even for people with dementia is music. If you can find their songs and things that they, and this is why chanting is interesting, that they have a lot of memory in relation to, whereas they can't remember their name, half the time. If they hear the right music, or if they start singing, all of a sudden
sometimes it can come back.
Yeah, sometimes parts of their minds will become functional again because of music, and because the memories and things are stored in subtle, in some scars that are deep in the sensation patterns in the body, and those aren't affecting the conscious mind a lot of the time, and so there's some. But it's difficult.
And and it is, the fear of death it's very real, and our cultures very often don't deal with death, and we are not, so who knows how that might also impact her.
The mind.
Yeah, and it is also like a neurological thing that happens. So, but yeah, in terms of the Taittiriya Upanishad, that would be. It's a great open-ended question in a sense.
Yeah, because what imprint can a dementia mind create for the next birth if you think of it deeper in that way? It doesn't create any imprints in that sense. He was just living in the moment.
Yeah, well, that's an imprint.
People come, people bad, you greet people, but like there's no clinging to anything.
Yeah, which is that is an imprint, which is not a negative imprint, but that is like part of. We have a very dear friend whose mother had dementia, and he put together statements that she'd made into a beautiful book that he just produced and gave to a few people. and they were just pearls of wisdom that hadn't, what to the rest of us seemed like nothing to do with anything that was actually happening. But if you took them out of the situation she was in where they didn't make any sense, and you just put them on a piece of paper by themselves, many of them were just profound, beautiful statements. And so, so the mind is this curious thing that we're learning about, that, people have been theorizing about also for many, many, many thousands of years. And we're kind of learning as we go on that one. So, but I would think that would have an imprint, but not necessarily a bad one. Because, as you say, it's not attached.
No, it's hard on the people surrounding the
It's-
person with dementia.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard, and it's getting support for you and your loved ones. That's important because it is very difficult and and very moving. So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that
That's
up,
a-
Alex. That was
A
great.
great one, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe one more if anyone has anything. Otherwise. Anyone?
I have a question.
Okay.
So maybe this is also in light of like happiness and purpose, and also regarding the last question, but like when you think about life from this perspective where at the end everything's potentially just dissolving into the unknown, like where do you find meaning in the everyday?
When I think of it dissolving into the unknown.
Where do you find meaning? In the everyday, which is just like what's happening in your nose, or
Yeah.
on the stove.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my sort of my approach to things, which is not anyone else's, but it's like I do think of death and what it means, and as I get older I'm thinking of it more and thinking, oh dear, it's actually really going to happen. I mean, which we should all think anyway, but as you get older you start thinking, yep, it really is going to happen. But having been around people who are dying, having had some experience with that, it's one of those things that I feel I can't know until it's there. And so what it gives me is the initiative to really start making the effort to be aware in these moments, in a way, in preparation, if possible, if my mind is still able to do this, and etc., to be as clear as I can now, so that I get used to that feeling, so that when this unknown arrives, that perhaps I will be as clear as possible at that point. And also knowing that circumstances might arise where that will not be possible, and that is okay. That, let's say I can't be, I'm in excruciating pain or whatever, and I'm given drugs, and that is an act of mercy, and I'm not as clear as I might want to be. I will have had moments of clarity before that, and so that is kind of nice in its own way. And so it's like training, but also it's nice. Yeah. So, thank you. I think.
Mary, could I offer
Yeah.
a comment
Sure.
to that question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I often think of, our physical body as being the medium between the divine and, our soul, however you think of that. And so where meaning is constantly being experienced for me is simply just with embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
Embodiment and awareness of the now, of the fully present, which I think as linear time spirals, that can accompany us unto our death or to our transition.
Mm-hmm.
So at least theoretically, there's always this sense of meaning from embodiment. At least that's my thought.
That's beautiful.
Abhinavesha.
Yeah.
And so there's an organism, at the moment of death or the moment of opening the central channel, there's this kind of like, resistance to it. And people translate it as fear of death, but it's more like a reaction to the sensation. And so it's believed to be experienced in practice, and so a lot of people actually avoid the middle path in yoga because it's too much like death, and they'd rather, cultivate something else like their, fame, fortune, and certification or something. But it's part of the practice.
Yeah.
So I've read.
And yeah. And I think absorbing residue is is a critical part of what you're saying and what we've been talking about. That to be able to transition in just daily life or out of this body into whatever. So, yeah. And being familiar with residual transformation is kind of nice. Well, we have kept you all through thick and thin. Thank you so much for coming back.
You spun the wheel
as
of
we're
time.
sitting here
Look at your
going,
clock. And
oh no. But it was a wonderful group and a wonderful time to see all of you, and we so appreciate you coming. And I see some of you, Diana, I didn't get to you, but we'll be in touch. And Mojde, wonderful to see you, all these. Oh, Karina, you're still there. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
yeah, we'll see you soon.
Okay.